Hey, everybody. Welcome back. It is Friday night for some of you, Friday afternoon for some of us out here on the West Coast. Um, and so I thought I would take questions, but I will at the top just talk about where things stand right now. This is a more or less live shot of the Artemis 2 vehicle out on Launch Pad 39B. Um, the they NASA has been providing a live stream of the vehicle at the pad, and they switched to this shot earlier today. So this is a little bit closer than previous. But obviously, the big news of the last maybe 24 hours, maybe a little bit less than that, is that the wet dress rehearsal has kind of gone back and forth. So when the vehicle rolled out to the pad, the official word was no later than February 2nd, and then uh, and then about a week ago, they because of the teams at the pad and the launch teams in general, they worked really hard. They got all of the wet dress rehearsal preparations, which also double as launch preparations, done faster, which allowed them from a technical standpoint to be ready to begin the wet dress rehearsal countdown, which is a 2 day long countdown last night, which would have led to tanking day tomorrow night, or tomorrow. It's a 12-hour long process. Um, but the weather is seasonably cold. They do get these Arctic air blasts that'll go all the way down the Florida Peninsula. They were even talking about. I think I heard a weather forecaster in Orlando say even the Bahamas are going to be down into like the 50s during this. But it's a little bit. They cited sources cited to Bill Harwood of CBS News, who's the first one who that I saw report that the wet dress rehearsal was delayed 2 days. So the tanking day is back to February 2nd. But they talked about cold temperatures, and they also talked about high winds as there's a nor'easter going up the east coast, and a lot of cold air is going to wrap around that. And so it's going to be really cold here the next couple of days. And so they postponed the wet dress rehearsal for 48 hours. So now the countdown would start tomorrow night, Saturday night, and then tanking day would be Monday, February 2nd, Groundhog Day, and that's going to be an all day affair basically. So they'll start looking at the weather and treating it like a launch day. That'll start around 9:30 a.m. Eastern, and then they'll go all the way through the morning, through the afternoon. The test window opens at 9 p.m., so that would be the simulated liftoff time. But then, just like for the real thing, they have a multi-hour test window that they can conduct. They're going to conduct a series of tests in. And that test, so they'll go all the way through Monday, assuming that they stay on this schedule. They'll go all the way through Monday and overnight Monday into Tuesday, detanking, inerting the vehicle, and getting it turned around for a potential launch attempt. But the other domino that falls because of this is in the announcement this morning. They said because they had to push the test back to February 2nd, the tanking day, the earliest that they'd be able to recycle not just the hardware and the ground hardware and the flight hardware, but also the programs, all the people. They have a large flight readiness review, which involves all different layers of the agency, from Administrator Jared Isaacman all the way down to people on the floor. But a lot of managers at a lot of different levels. They have to do that huge review after the wet dress rehearsal, but before the first launch attempt, and they obviously have to pick a launch date. But now the launch is no earlier than Super Bowl Sunday, so if they were able to make it to that date, the launch would be. And let me go ahead and pull up the window on. It's the night of February 8th in the United States. So the 2 hour window would open at 11:20 p.m. Eastern, And then it would go until 1:20 a.m. Eastern on the 9th. And so that's several hours after the Super Bowl's over, very likely. But it would be the Sunday all day would be tanking the vehicle, not this coming Sunday, but a week from Sunday. And so that would be, in theory, that's the soonest that they can launch. And the other implication of this is because they no longer have the ability to launch on the 6th or the 7th, they have these 3 opportunities, which are really 3 nights in a row. It's just that the launch window drifts across midnight in the Eastern time zone. But like out here in the Pacific time zone where I am for a little bit longer, this is the night of February 8th, the night of February 9th, the night of February 10th. And then the other consideration is that they have not talked about the ability to do 3 launch attempts in a row, back to back to back. And so in theory, this would give them a maximum of 2 launch attempts that they could make on 2 of these 3 days. And so that's, again, that's getting a little bit down the road though, because they have to conduct the test, the wet dress rehearsal tanking test. It has to be relatively clean and successful. And then assuming that that's the case, that will give them the opportunity to make 1 or more launch attempts here, end of next week, essentially. But this is, this is the vehicle. This is this shot. It's somewhere around the observation gantry, I believe. Maybe a little bit. It's been a while since I've been out there. But then this is more or less live, and then this is some footage. It's the same camera from a couple of hours ago. This is just a little bit of time-lapsed footage from same vantage point, but just before sunset. And so you can see again you could see a van up on the pad surface there. A couple of things that you can also see. The engine and booster service platforms were lowered and rolled out from underneath the mobile launcher and kind of down the slope of the pad. That was earlier in the week. And then the side flame deflectors, you can kind of see them here, were rolled in underneath the mobile launcher. There are also a set of extensible columns that provide some additional bracing for the mobile launcher structure underneath. And so those were a couple of the preparations that, as I was saying at the top, most of the preparations for the wet dress rehearsal, because it is almost a carbon copy of the launch, except for the last 30 seconds that they don't do. And then obviously the mission, they also double as launch preparations. And so in theory, if the vehicle comes out of the wet dress rehearsal clean, it would almost be like a weather scrub and weather scrub turnaround. So they would just recycle the vehicle and get it ready for the next tanking, except that the next tanking after the wet dress rehearsal would be with the crew getting on board, and assuming that they can count down to T0, they would start the mission. So, but there's a few ifs in there. And so, that's, I think that's kind of where they are. I mean, I can, again, we can do questions, and you could, I'll try and pull up some hopefully relevant, references, but that's where we are right now. So the wet dress rehearsal, tanking day, which is the critical day of the test, is now Monday. And then the earliest they can launch now is Sunday, February 8th. So, that's basically where we are right now. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. How long after the test will they announce whether February is possible? So that's what I was talking about. So if we play that out, they will they'll go through the entire night, Monday night into Tuesday, doing the testing. Then they'll detank. And so they'll need to compile the results of the test, probably on Tuesday. And so if I had to, so Tuesday would be the 3rd. It's possible then I'm not sure whether we would see the flight readiness review on the 4th or maybe the 5th, but somewhere in there. And then now that the 8th is the earliest they could do that, the launch countdown, which is the same 2-day long countdown. It's a little bit more than 48 hours with the built-in holds. And I can go through those if you want. We will have a lot of time to go through those during the tanking test as well. But they would need to start that on the night of the 6th, the previous earliest date, which would be, that would be Friday, a week from tonight. They need to start the countdown by Friday night, which means between Monday night and Friday night, they need to conduct the flight readiness review and agree that they are, again, which, results pending, of course. But assuming that the results are satisfactory, they still need to conduct that. It's I don't know how long it is. It's, many hours. All of the programs that are involved in this, all the centers that are involved in this, all the contractors that are involved in this will all get together and decide, or, first they'll basically say whether or not they're ready to fly. And then assuming that everybody says they're ready to fly, they'll pick a launch date and they would announce it. The official date would be at the conclusion of the flight readiness review. We would very likely have some kind of, actually this will be kind of interesting, but usually they have a news conference after the flight readiness review. They might not hold it in suspense, the date itself, but they'll have a news conference and talk about, here's what we talked about, here's how we got to picking this date, or there were issues and we need to push back farther. But we'll just have to see, because this is a very compressed time window, and they knew this going out to the pad, that doing this with all of the time constraints, that they were going to, this was an exercise in not just testing the vehicle, making sure that it's good, but also hitting this 5-night long window, and getting as many launch attempts as they could within this window. And so we're now sort of we're pushing towards the back edge of that window now. But that's when we would, thinking about it big picture again, they only have 3 dates that they can use now, assuming again that the release that they put out, I can. But this is, this release that they put out said that February 6th and February 7th are now off the table. And so they only have those 3 dates that they can pick in February. I mean, they could obviously also just say, we need more time. That's a possibility as well. But that's kind of where, that's kind of what we would see. And I don't know whether I would be, if they do the tanking test on Monday, I wouldn't expect them to push into the flight readiness review on Tuesday. It would probably be no earlier than Wednesday, maybe Thursday, but they have to start the countdown on Friday. And I don't know how much they would want to overlap that. Again, we'll just have to see, because, the flip side of this is, if you have a vehicle that's ready to fly, all the people are ready to fly. If the hardware is ready to fly and you still have time to make a launch attempt or two, they want to maximize their chances of flying when they're ready. So the flip side of it is, again, if the vehicle's not ready, the hardware's not ready, then they don't have to go. But they only have until I'll put that back up again. So really no, that's not it. So they really only have, as I just again to reiterate, they only have the night of the 8th, the night of February 8th, again, Eastern time zone, US, night of February 9th with, and it dribbles, you can see 6 minutes, the window is 6 minutes after midnight, but that attempt would be a night of the 9th attempt. And then the night of the 10th, they'll spend most of the day on, what would that be? That would be Tuesday afternoon. It'll be a little bit later in the evening, but it'll be, most of Tuesday afternoon we'll be tanking the vehicle, getting the crew on board, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's what's in front of them. How's the tanking test go? And then, when will they be ready to make their first attempt? And again, there's results pending for the tanking test. So, in terms of how much can they reclaim? So they'll drain. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they lose a significant amount of, especially hydrogen. So they're limited. The limiting consumable in terms of propellants in the two liquid stages, the core stage and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. So that's, let's go to this just for grins. It's actually kind of hard to see the ICPS because it's dwarfed by the core stage, but the core stage is, here in between the solid rocket boosters, and then you have the launch vehicle stage adapter above it, and then right above that is the white right above the slightly less orange is the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, and you can only see most of the stage is inside that conical adapter. All we're seeing on the outside is just the liquid hydrogen tank of that. But the reason that they lose so much liquid hydrogen is because this vehicle, they do not, like Space Shuttle recirculated and reclaimed the chill down flow through the engines of liquid hydrogen. They would recirculate that back into that drop tank that they used for shuttle. For this vehicle, because I think it's one of the consequences of this vehicle being expendable is that they deleted some equipment, that being recirculation pumps for liquid hydrogen, and so when the liquid hydrogen that is circulated through the 4 RS-25 engines, once that goes through that path, that recirculation chill down path through the engines, it's then dumped overboard, and it actually goes out. And this is a time lapse from before. I'll just go ahead and come back to the other time lapse. But so that's dumped overboard, and so they lose all of that. And there's once the liquid hydrogen tank gets closer to fast fill and then into fill, then they will start using some of that to chill down the RS-25 engines. They need, if I recall correctly, a couple somewhere between 2 and 3 hours of chill down to get the engine hardware down to the proper temperatures for engine start. So and so what they have now is they constructed a second liquid hydrogen storage tank, a sphere we'll call it a lot of times. You can't see it on this camera, but they now have 2 gigantic tanks, and the new tank is actually bigger than is significantly bigger than the old one. I think the new one can, and again, I'm using English units because those are the units that we have. Let me see if I can find that just for grins, because there is a graphic of that compares those 2 tanks. Nope, that's not it. Let's see if it's in here. Well, is there a picture of it? But the nice thing about this graphic that I'm thinking of is that it does have the metric units on it. Oops, almost had it. But what they'll use those 2 tanks for is it allows them to do, they have the physical storage capacity to make up to 3 launch attempts in a row. but they, again, the probably the limiting constraint is, or one of them is, again, the launch teams. It's because this is somewhere upwards of a 12-hour process every single time. Once you start stacking those work days back to back to back, it becomes they do have the capability to do two of them back to back, but then they want to do a rest day in there. Let me see if I can. All right, I'll just have to pull it up in the. Well, hopefully you can see this if I can get to it. Okay, sorry, that took a little while, but so these are the the tanks, and they're of course using, if you spot in the background, that's with the Block 1B vehicle. This is probably going back about 10 years. So again, for those of you who are familiar with it, that's with the vehicle with the swooshes on, with the swooshes on the boosters. They decided not to do that, but this will allow them to do. They could do as many as 4 launch attempts in 6 days. But again, because of the situation that's specific to Artemis 2, they won't have this on subsequent flights. They have a smaller or shorter launch opportunity every month. So in this case, in February, they only had 5 days where they could make a launch attempt, and that'll vary a little bit. So there might be there might be months where they have maybe 4, and then they may have some months in the summertime or elsewhere in the year where they may have 6 or 7 or maybe even 8. But this is what allows them to handle the loss of the hydrogen during the tanking. And so and what they were planning to do was they'll use one of the storage tanks to load the vehicle, and they'll use the other tank as kind of to backfill, to replenish the quote unquote load tank. And the plan going in was for the new one. So this would be the tank that they'd flow propellants from that tank to the, there are cross country lines that run across the pad infield up the incline, and then into the mobile launcher. And then they would use and that's the new one. And then they would use the old Apollo tank, which is what they were using for Artemis 1. They would use that to replenish. And then, but they have the capability. You can see in this graphics, they have the ability to replenish. They bring tankers in from outside to replenish both commodities. So now I don't think you can see it in this graphic, but the liquid oxygen storage tank is somewhere probably over here. It's in the northwest corner of the pad infield, and these are in the northeast, more or less, corner of the pad infield. So, let's see. So, let's see. So let's see. What will it? So, I mean, I would say I can't remember the exact fractions, but I think it was more than half of the liquid hydrogen, and same with the liquid oxygen. You don't have as they can control the boil off a little bit better, but they're also doing some level of chill downs there. So they do dump both commodities overboard. It's just oxygen's a little bit well, not just a little bit, but they're different commodities in a lot of different ways. So. But it's more than half. I think they get back more than half of what they, so, but they do consume some, and it's just that they don't get back. And that's what those storage tanks are for, is to cover for there's the bleed flow, so to speak, that I've been talking about for engine chill downs. That's probably more expensive in terms of what they lose. And then there's just the boil off, because again, this is like most vehicles that don't use densified propellants. The propellants here are stored very near their boiling point. So, and so you also have boil off, and all of that, the hydrogen is vented out, and it's not vented to air. That goes out to the flare stacks and is burned, for safety reasons. And then the liquid oxygen does get there. I think there's still like a vent. There's like a dump pond area that they can let that just kind of escape into the air. And then you'll see the vehicle venting. Those vents are basically gaseous oxygen. And so, but they can vent oxygen into the air. They cannot vent hydrogen into the air. So, what challenges will there be in keeping the vehicle on the pad until March? I would probably, one of the bigger ones is probably just weather. They're going to put the vehicle has sort of the vehicle has generic limits on how long it can stay out at the pad, and some of that has to do with winds and all that. This is, you don't see a lot of no hurricanes this time of the year, no tropical systems, but you can have severe weather, especially as you push closer to the spring. That's one thing. It's just outdoors, so it's less protected from the elements. And then, so there may be, it's a machine, and it's an assembly of different machines. And so, they'll have, there could be parts that there could be, not like a light bulb burning out, but you could have something that needs to be replaced. So there's some, minimal level of cost. What they will have to do, though, is they will have to install what's called the contingency pad access. It's just basically a couple of platforms. Let me see if I can pull that graphic up. So they would have to repeat the flight termination system end-to-end test. It would be somewhat abbreviated because the vehicle's in a different configuration than it would be in the VAB, but they will have to repeat that test at some point if they go past February, the night of February 10th into February, early morning of February 11th. And then the first window in March, I think, is right around the same time, because it goes on it repeats on kind of a lunar month type of a frequency. So, but yeah, let's see if I can. Right. So what they'll do is these platforms here, this is sort of a double platform, but it's, got a main platform and then a branch. And then this, so this is the backside of the vehicle. What the view we're seeing is we're looking at the vehicle from, this direction. That's not the right way to do this, but, sort of from, from this way, we're looking at it like that. So this is on the backside facing the umbilical tower. And so what this does is this gives them access to the forward skirts of both solid rocket boosters. So that's, now we got to do, that's here. You can kind of see this, the core stage inner tank, one of the access doors, and then so this is the right-hand solid rocket booster, because we're looking at it the other way. And then over here, you can't actually see it, but you can see the platform. And then the left-hand solid rocket booster, they'll take off, they'll undo the bolts for the flight doors. They'll take those doors off, go in, set up equipment, reconfigure the vehicle, do the test, and then back out of it again, undo all the things that they're doing, and take the platforms off, and then they'll be basically ready for another, that will recycle them and give them another 28 to 35 days once they repeat that test. But because you have to repeat that test every approximately 5 weeks until you launch. So if you launch before the 5 weeks are up, you're good. But if you don't, then you need, and you get past 5 weeks, then you need to repeat this test. So that's probably the main retest that they need to do on the vehicle at the pad, and they'll have to time that such that they get the entire March window. And they were able to do that in the VAB in early-ish January. So they have plenty of time. This was a constraint for Artemis 1 a lot more than it is now for Artemis 2. But they will have to repeat this test if they stay out there through the rest of February. So so let me go back to, I'll just go back to, attempt to go back to the live shot. There we go. Then the question, what's the difference in flight profiles between Block 1 and Block 1B? I wish I knew in better detail, but really the difference between the two, because this the Block 1 vehicle has a this was sort of a commercial off-the-shelf upper stage, but it's just barely, I hate to say it, but it's just barely adequate in terms of a performance standpoint. This can just barely get Orion on that translunar injection, but it cannot do it in the traditional type of way, which is usually you launch, you go into a low Earth orbit, circular orbit at like 185 kilometers. Again, NASA still uses nautical miles, so 100 nautical miles, same kind of thing. And then you have like about a 3,000 meter per second delta velocity that you need to make from there to go out to the moon. Well, given that you have to reserve performance for good days, bad days, and everything, ICPS can do it, but just barely, and it actually requires help from the core stage in order to do that. So what the core stage does on Block 1 is, rather than insert into a circular orbit, it inserts into it takes the vehicle up to an apogee of about 2,200 kilometers. And so for Block 1B, you go back to the more traditional, the more it gives you more flexibility. What will happen is the core stage doesn't have enough performance for a much larger upper stage, the exploration upper stage. So they'll stage, and this is where I wish we had a better idea of a detail standpoint, because the core stage will cut off basically in orbit. It'll cut off maybe 30 meters per second, which isn't very much out of almost 8,000 meters per second. It'll cut off short so that it's disposed of correctly. For Block 1B, it'll stage well below that. We just don't know how much, but it'll, and then EUS will have to do, again, like a traditional upper stage. It will have to finish the ascent insertion burn. And again, if you remember Saturn V, kind of like, but not exactly, but kind of like the S4B third stage of the Saturn V. Except I think that the EUS has to do a little bit more than that for Block 1B, but it'll insert into a circular orbit, and then it obviously has the performance not only to start from a lower energy orbit of 100 nautical miles circular, 185 kilometers circular, and still go to the moon, but it can also send an additional 10 metric tons, which is how you get the additional payloads. In addition to Orion, it can send. So this vehicle with the core stage, with transferring performance from the core stage to ICPS, you can do about 27, 28 metric tons to TLI. For Block 1B, we'll be able to do about 38 metric tons, again, with co-manifested with Orion. And then Block 2, if they got that far with the Bolay boosters, would be they're shooting to get to 43. So it's like Orion, Block 1B's Orion plus 10 metric tons. Block 2 would be Orion plus 15 metric tons of payload to translunar injection. So, and so that's what the profile will be, is core stage will stage well below orbital velocity. It'll be, but still probably, 5-6 kilometers per second at staging. But again, we don't know for sure. But then EUS will go into a circular orbit, and then they'll go to the moon. they'll go to the moon again, very much like Apollo, where they can, if they need to, they can, they may be able to use a second low Earth orbit if they need to line things up correctly. So, let's see. So is Artemis safe after Artemis 3? I mean, I think for now, but again, we don't know when Artemis 3 is going to be. So at this point, we only, the goal is to be by 2028, which to me is still kind of funny because that's like, I'll have that to you by Wednesday. Does that mean you're going to have it to me at the end of the day Wednesday, or does that mean you'll get it to me at the start of Wednesday? But whatever. What it means in this case is they're giving themselves all the way until the end of 2028, which is basically the end of this presidential term, to fly Artemis 3, but there's no guarantees that everybody's going to be ready by then. And so assuming that they're going to stay with Artemis 3, they just had the big argument last year about when they will do the transition to commercial. And Congress sort of put it in law that they moved that to Artemis 5, but there's really, the White House proposed terminating everything after Artemis 3. Well, at the time that they made that proposal, Artemis was much more of an open-ended thing. So it's perfectly within the rights of the White House to come back in a couple of months and say, we still think we should get rid of all this stuff. And maybe not, maybe before Artemis 5. And it's like, we still think this is the right thing to do. We're willing to pay all the termination fees to do it. We're willing to create another mess, blah, blah, blah. Again, it's just a question of who has the votes, who makes the arguments. There are arguments for and against, on both sides. I mean, if this wasn't, it's contentious because there are arguments on both sides, or multiple sides perhaps. So right now, in theory, they would be using these systems, SLS, Orion, Gateway, through Artemis 5. And then sometime before that happens, you would want to have the commercial systems, which is obviously Starship and Blue Moon. So Starship, SpaceX, Blue Moon, Blue Origin. If they would need to be ready in that sort of beginning of next decade timeframe. And so assuming that that's the case, then maybe Congress is okay with that, because it'll obviously be a lot less expensive for taxpayers to do it that way. But the problem is we don't know if Starship and Blue Moon are going to be ready to not just do the lunar part of it, but also do the crew part of it. So if they're going to replace this system that we're looking at here kind of in the dark, they need to be able to carry passengers from the ground all the way to the moon and return them safely to the ground. And so we're waiting to see when that happens. And the thing is, right now, the way that they're doing this, they're doing the lunar lander part of it first, and then doing the crew part of it, not necessarily completely, but they're going to be challenged to have the lunar lander part of it done by 2029. So I think it's, there's a bunch of different questions here, but if, it'll probably still be called Artemis regardless. But I think the question, sort of the implicit question there is Artemis, how long is Artemis going to look like this? That's right now, probably through the end of the decade. And it's just a question of, again, does somebody have a better argument, or does somebody have the leverage politically to institute their policy? Right now, Congress probably has more leverage. It means more to Congress. And so the position of Congress is, show us you have a system that can do everything that this system can do. And again, they would like this, they'd like this system to do more. So they're hoping that when new systems, the commercial systems come online, they can fly faster than this system flies, because again, we're probably looking at 3 flights in the whole decade. And so they want to do better than that too, but they don't want to cancel this and then wait around for the next system. They want there to be no gap this time. So that's, and I guess the one big thing about this is I'm just not expecting the argument to go completely away for the rest of this administration. I have a feeling this argument, maybe they'll skip this year, 2026, but I will not be surprised if we're seeing this argument go on every year, certainly through the rest of this administration, of why not, let's just, the White House is going to be saying, why not move to commercial now or as soon as possible? And Congress is going to be saying, okay, when you guys have a working system and you demonstrate, just like Dragon did with their, uncrewed demo 1 and their crewed demo 2, once you do your Artemis 2, which is what this is the crewed demo for Orion and SLS. So, but once they demonstrate that, then it's going to be harder to argue to keep this system. And we'll have to see what Congress says at that point. But the problem is we don't know when that will be, so that's why there's no obvious choice here. There's people who are advocating on both sides, and there just isn't a clear choice yet. Again, maybe in a couple of years, the choice will be clearer. So, why are the astronauts quarantining before they go to the moon? I think certainly from a performance standpoint, they will be better able to perform, especially, if the mission goes nominally, again, in theory, maybe they don't have to respond to anything, but there are situations right now, the crews are trained to be able to fly these missions basically with no help. Nominally, they'll have lots of help. But they're trained to be able to fly this mission with no help. And so, that also means not just fly it without any help, but also what happens if there are, what if you can't talk to the ground and then you have a solar storm, or what if you have something fail while you can't talk to the ground? So it's that kind of stuff where I think you don't necessarily want people to be sick when they have to deal with a high workload situation, and so they've done that pretty much. It's a protocol that they've instituted for, I don't know if it goes all the way back to like Gemini or Mercury, but I'm pretty sure it was around at least by the time of Apollo, and so that's almost 60 years ago now. So. Concerns about crew safety for the acceleration plan. I don't know, because we don't know what the acceleration plans are. We don't know what the acceleration plan is for Starship. We don't know what we know what Starship's trying to accelerate, but we don't know anything about the Blue Origin plan other than a few rumors about this or that. So we don't know what their plan is, and we don't know how they're accelerating. Because they're not accelerating the Mark II plan, not in whole. The rumors are that they're going to use some hodgepodge of their cargo lander that they still haven't tested this year yet. So we have to see when that lander went to Houston to do thermal vacuum testing. But we'll have to see when it launches, and again, results pending. But we don't have a good idea out here what exactly they're planning, what their plan is. And so all of those are questions about safety and schedule, and how much, or maybe a better way to put it, or a more equitable way to put it instead of safety, is to say, how much additional risk are they accepting for an acceleration, and if any. But those are the types of things we just don't have any clue about, unfortunately, not in public. I'm sure that there are people that know, But that's one of the things that I've been talking about, is the fact that we don't know. We're not being allowed to. We're not being allowed in on it necessarily. These are commercial systems; they're proprietary. I don't know that maybe we aren't allowed to, but this is supposedly, it used to be a public program, which is of course becoming more private. But if the goal is NASA's, then I do think that there is some value in there being some level of public oversight about what they're going to do. And right now we have no clue. I'm exaggerating, but only slightly. What's the concept of operations for the Blue Moon acceleration plan? I don't know. And I've heard some rumors about the Starship one, but the devil is in the details, and we don't know those. And so, and I think there's a lot of people that would like to know, not just me. So I don't know how much additional risk they're taking. That would be a secondary question. So we shall see. Let's see. This is the question about tipping over. It's an interesting question, but I think one of the things we will see with Starship, obviously in a different gravity field, so to speak, but well, no, we won't. That's right. We aren't going to see Starship land on legs on Earth. I forgot about that. That's what the uncrewed demo is for, at least in part. And so they're, again, talking about, I'm belaboring this point on purpose, because one of the things we don't know about Blue Origin's plan is what demos are they going to do, because SpaceX has said, we know what the SpaceX demos are going to be, and they're important technical demos, the propellant transfer demo, and then but the uncrewed lunar landing demo. So maybe the propellant transfer demo doesn't apply to a blue, one of the rumors about the Blue Origin concept of operations is no propellant transfer, but they still would, in theory, need to demonstrate the system that they're going to land crew on the moon with in an uncrewed configuration before they fly an Artemis 3 mission. And so, we don't know we don't even know what Blue Origin is going to do in terms of pre-landing, pre-Artemis 3 demonstrations. It seems like if we were going to have a fair competition between the two, that they'd have to do analogous demonstrations. But again, so coming back to the whole tipping over thing, SpaceX will have to demonstrate with the HLS variant of Starship that they can land the vehicle on the moon. I know it's only one, but it's at least it's a demonstration. It will provide data and some level of confidence. But and then obviously there will be some level of risk that they'll have to take depending on that, but that they were going to have to at least demonstrate it once. At least, again, as far as we know, that was the original plan. So, let me see if I know. Let me go back up here for a second, see, because I'm missing a little tiny bit of the projected production rate of SLS. So there's a lot of stuff kicked around, and I've gone into this in other videos, but there's the initial rate is the one flight per year. So you have to be able to, and then that means for SLS, one core stage, one exploration upper stage have to be delivered every year. You have to deliver 4 RS-25 engines every year. You have to deliver 2 solid rocket boosters every year. And then, there's a couple of connectors. I imagine that those are not the bottleneck. I would say right now, at least up until, again, if we assume that they continue to fly SLS out past Artemis 5, for instance, then the production of the boosters and the engines is relatively well known because those existed before SLS ever existed. And so it's the stages. So it's getting the core stage up to, first getting it to an annual delivery rate, and then same for EUS. And then they have talked about, I think they wanted to get up to two per year, and within the interim being 3 in 2 years. So that's like one and a half a year. But we just haven't seen, I mean, I don't know that you really need to worry about 3 every 2 years or 2 every year until you get to 1 every year. And then we're not there yet. They still have, we haven't heard as much about what the bottlenecks are at the, lower level, but the things we've heard about are, supply chain, especially. They've had issues with parts. They're competing with a lot of other, the industry there's a lot more to the industry now. So they're competing with other rockets, other spacecraft, other, aerospace, applications and companies for parts. And so there's that. And then there's also, again, there's the workforce, I would say. So they've now, they're finishing the 3rd build of the core stage. So I think at this point they understand how to build it. And so, if there's parts and labor and process, I think they have a decent handle on the process because they've gone through this. They've gone through it completely twice. They've gone through most of the 3rd one already, but they're still having issues with retaining labor and with the parts supply. And so those are some of, those are a couple of the issues that again, those are big picture issues, but, we'll see. Like, again, I would say, let's see when this 3rd core stage, we just saw the top 4/5 of the elements, bolted together. They still have some work to do on that. Let's see when that leaves New Orleans, and then let's see where they are on the 4th one. So, maybe if they can finish the 3rd core stage this year, 2026, when do they deliver the 4th one? And then, EUS might be a little bit of a different question because it's the 1st one, but that would at least be a little bit of a measuring stick, would be when do they deliver the 3rd one and when do they deliver the 4th core stage, because they've gotten, they've gone through this process a few times now. Can they really, how close can they get to an annual delivery rate? So as a comparison, look at the European service module. So ESM3, they just delivered ESM4 last year, and I believe they delivered that about 15 months after ESM3, and we're seeing some progression there in terms of they're beating, they're shaving the time from one delivery to the next down. It's harder to see that for Orion and SLS, so far. And so that's, again, those are obviously big questions that people are interested in, or certainly I am. So, So yeah, again, if you guys have any, I guess things are fairly straightforward for what's going on with Artemis 2. But if anybody has any Artemis 2 questions, I'm certainly happy to take some more of those. But I mean, we're kind of where we are right now, which is the wet dress rehearsal was postponed for 48 hours. They're hoping to complete the test on Monday night. And that at the earliest that they can now launch would be Super Bowl Sunday night, which is February 8th. and they have opportunities to launch in February. Those 3 nights in a row: the night of the 8th, the night of February 9th, and the night of February 10th. And really, right now, the things that we're looking for are the results of the wet dress rehearsal on Monday night, or maybe to back up a little bit, I think we're a little curious, considering this was postponed due to weather, how much better the weather is going to be on Monday than it was projected for tomorrow night. Because if it's not a whole lot better, then we could see, then you start to run up against the very end of the launch window. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they handle the weather on Monday, unless it's just better. So, but that's one of those things. But right now it's, can they conduct the test on Monday? What are the results of the test, of the wet dress rehearsal test on Monday? When's the flight readiness review? I would assume, again, because the test takes so long, it's not likely to be the flight readiness review for a test that ends on Monday night. It's probably not going to be any earlier than Wednesday. And they would need to start the countdown for the 8th, Friday night. So, but we should get some resolution or answers to those questions here, beginning on Monday. Julian's asking about the cold soak call out in the, let me see if I can pull that up on the timeline. I guess that's one thing I could do. Let me see if there was any. I know there are some other questions about, big picture questions about HLS and Artemis in general. And that's, there's just a lot of questions right now. And it's hard to tell what, I hope, again, we've gotten some guidance is not the right word, but there's been some suggestion that we're going to get, that after Artemis 2 is completed, that we'll get a little bit of trying to think of what, but they'll tell us a little bit more about what they're thinking post Artemis 2. So, after Artemis 2 is over, then they're going to tell us what they're thinking, even though, again, I'm sure that they've been thinking about this. I think I mentioned in one of the videos, what happens after this mission, Artemis 2, because it used to be called Exploration Mission 2, has been a question for a decade. And so they've had a lot of time to think about this. They've changed plans a lot, but it's not, even if they don't know exactly what they're doing, I'd say it would be reasonable to just lay out some of their options even now before Artemis 2, because they're obviously considering some of this stuff, because they don't have a whole hell of a lot of time, to land Artemis 3 by the end of 2028. It's less than 3 years from now, and they've got a lot of work to do. And so, I think it'll be more interesting, because once if they did put their cards on the table, and to be fair, the new administration's only been there for about a month, but this is their biggest priority. That's their words. That's a month is a long time when you're talking about less than 3 years. A month is a significant percentage of that. So, because the thing is, once they lay their cards on the table, or again, hypothetically, but if they laid their cards on the table, that just gives you information then to ask the next line of questions. It's just not, so, and that's part of the frustration is, we don't have a basic understanding of what they're thinking about, and what the consequences of that are. And really the consequences of those are going to be kind of like that one of the questions that you guys asked about: how much risk are they considering additional risk? They're weighing, maybe not just taking, but weighing to service their, in service of this deadline of the end of 2028. So it's hard to tell exactly. It's hard to tell what questions to ask until unless we see them lay their cards on the table. I don't know that we don't know if and when that's going to happen. So I don't know. So again, going back to the cold soak question. So you have this thing here. Let me see. Let me bracket it a little bit tighter. But this is I don't know whether they're doing this on tanking day for wet dress rehearsal, but I would suspect that they are, because this is the first all up crew rated Orion vehicle that's flying. So this is probably, I wouldn't be surprised if this is another one of the development flight test objectives that they have for this mission, but they haven't really given us a lot of color about that. So, but it is interesting, and I would you can see it's possible that they're going to be seeing what effect the tanking SLS will have on some of the components in the service modules, which is closer to the ICPS and then the crew module adapter. But yeah, it would be nice to be able to see what happens with or it would be nice to get a little bit of color about what exactly that is, but I don't know that much about it. But I know what you're talking about, which is this is going to be very early on tanking day. And maybe while I'm looking at some questions, let's I'm just going to put up the timeline, because the timeline would be, this is going to be assuming that they target 9 p.m. for that test window, whatever day it is, whether it was Saturday and then they moved it to Monday night. The day's going to begin around here Eastern time. They'll have a management meeting. So MMT's mission management team, they'll have a meeting to decide whether or not the weather and the vehicle are ready to be loaded with propellant. And then the chill downs of the transfer lines will begin a little bit before 11. You'll get into the chill downs of the propellant lines in the core stage right after that, and then you get into the part of the tanking, assuming that they're on time. These things could drift around a little bit, so it might, instead of 11:10 for liquid oxygen main propulsion system chill down, maybe that's 11:05 or 11:15 or 11:20. It could be. It just depends. But assuming that they're close to this timeline, the times that we're going to be looking for that corresponded to when they saw hydrogen leaks in Artemis 1 would be around noon time. So, and again on this timeline, again this is assuming I did the time math correctly. I might be off here or there, but. Core stage LH2 fast fill was kind of where when they increased the flow rate is where they saw, when they say leak, what they're talking about was that they're measuring the concentration of, they're sampling the air in this little tight volume between the umbilical plates, between the ground and the vehicle. And in there, you'll see they're purging that with a lot of gaseous helium to reduce the flammability risk in there. And so they have a sampler that's looking at the concentrations, and most of it should be helium, but there might be some oxygen, there might be some oxygen molecules, there might be some nitrogen molecules from air if the seals aren't perfect. But there should be a low level of hydrogen in there. And so, but if that concentration goes up above, the limit's now 10%. If it goes up above 10%, they'd have to stop. It used to be lower, and that's what happened on Artemis 1 is they saw the concentration go up above, mostly helium, but they saw more hydrogen and they had to stop. And so that's what we're going to kind of be looking for in that late morning, lunchtime Right now would be on Monday. So, but that also happens to be where that cold soak would be kind of in this, would be back here in this 11 a.m., 10:45 a.m., and it is also possible that if the weather, if they understand the weather and the vehicle, maybe they'll start early. It is possible. We saw that with Artemis 1 where they started early because everything was fine. They'd cleared the launch pad area, they cleared the blast danger area. Everybody's ready to go, so they started early, and so it is possible that we'll see them start a little early. But it's also possible that they have to have a lot of discussions about weather, et cetera, and they could also start late, and they could also start on time. So we'll just have to see what happens when we get to that. What percentage of the orange rocket is orange? It's basically just it is a coating. It's a fairly thick coating over the exterior of the propellant tanks, and in this case the launch vehicle stage adapter. It's thermal protection, so it serves. They chose to use foam for the launch vehicle stage adapter, but there's no cryogenic propellant of note inside that volume. That's there to protect against friction heating, skin heating as the vehicle flies through the atmosphere. So the foam serves that purpose too as the vehicle ascends through the lower atmosphere. But there's no, it's an interesting question. I don't know, because the thing is, anything even inside the vehicle, we aren't allowed to see, or we aren't allowed to show pictures of the inside of the core stage. But the other parts of the vehicle, besides the insides of the propellant tanks, look like we would imagine. It's just more or less empty. But the insides of like the engine section, all of those propellant lines that run liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen are also covered with foam. I don't know how orange those look, because the tanning is a process of ultraviolet exposure to ultraviolet light. So they're probably not, when they spray it on, it's almost like a cream color. And then it becomes, but then it goes through, it very quickly tans, and then eventually saturates. But I wouldn't expect those pipes in there to be, let me see if I wonder if I have a picture of that. Cause we did see a feed line. I might have a picture of that. I know it was in one of the stories, one of the stories we did for NSF. And I think I've gone past it. Oh no, here we go. Let's see if I can bring it up. That's the problem. So I need to close this, and then I need to, let's see, there we go. Okay. So it's a little bit hard to see because there are some, they also have the red on this. This is this is a segment of one of the liquid oxygen feed lines that runs down the outside of the vehicle. But you can see here, this part is foamed already. They do some of it beforehand, but then you have these bolted flanges on the edge, on the ends of these segments, and the red's just protection to make sure you don't want to bump bump those, because you're talking about sealing liquid oxygen or liquid hydrogen. But you can see this part of the line has already been pre-treated, so to speak, with foam, and then they'll treat the rest of it once it's in place. And then same thing for the inside of the vehicle. There's a bunch of feed lines, so you've got, for liquid oxygen, you've got the two downcomers that run along the opposite sides of the tank. They'll go into the engine section, and then they fork to 4 feed lines for each of the RS-25 engines. And then same thing with the liquid hydrogen tank, which is right there sitting right above the engines. And so they just have 4 lines running directly from the bottom of the aft manifold of that, directly from the tank into the engines. But those would all have foam on them too. We're not allowed to see we're not allowed to see inside once they're but we were able to see some of this. Let me clear that out, and then I need to bring up the let's see. So and so yeah, that was one of the things. So the weather forecast for tomorrow night, they were talking about it being, this is actually, and again, this is why it's not a complete head scratcher, but I'm just kind of wondering what else is going on there, because my understanding of the weather forecast for Saturday, and so let me bring the timeline up again. I'm sure the forecast was refined over the last couple of days, but the forecast that they were talking about for the Arctic air was that they would get up to a relatively decent high temperature tomorrow, around midday, which is when they would be fueling the vehicle. And then the air would come in, but also high winds would come in. And so the temperature the bottom would fall out of the temperature, sometime in the early afternoon. So the question is, from a temperature standpoint, do you need, what exactly is the criteria? Because the criteria talks about the way that it's worded in the press kit. They talk about this. I was doing a live stream with the channel members, so we have this handy already. But you can see how do they calculate? How is this criteria determined? The 24-hour average temperature, because you can take measurements, and we've seen some in the past where they talk about taking taking the temperature, so to speak, at 5-minute intervals. But is a 24-hour average really across, the temperature taken every 5 minutes across over the last 24 hours? It kind of sounds like that. And you would have the diurnal, you'd have a high and a low, and, does it average out above 41.4 Fahrenheit? And so that's the thing. So then the other factor that they talked about, though, in the weather forecast was, I don't remember whether they said sustained winds, but I assume they meant gusts. But gusts up to like 40 miles an hour, which is approximately tropical storm force magnitude, which the vehicle can handle that, but there's a difference between the vehicle being, battening down the hatches, so to speak, and being hunkering down and just standing there on the pad versus making a launch attempt with that type of weather. And so those are some of the questions that we have about the weather: is how much of the decision to postpone was the temperature, how much of it was the winds. Those would be obvious questions about that. So, because, and again, like I said, maybe I assume the forecast changed, but they would be significantly into tanking if we're talking about the temperature dropping quickly afternoon. You still have gotten through, the vehicle's going to have to sit and in stable replenish, where they're just topping off the propellants for a long time. You can see if the test window opens at 9 and they're just starting to fill the tank at 12, that's 9 hours right there. So, but yeah, not spelled out very with a lot of detail. And I don't know whether we're going to get to hear from the launch team, or whether there's going to be a news conference before the test or not. I would suspect not, since the test tanking day begins early on Monday morning. The day before would be Sunday morning. So yeah, I'm not expecting to get a lot of additional details until post test. We'll just have to see how that goes. So. Yeah, so yeah, they're talking about some of the lows for the, I mean the okay, so Armando is saying the lows Saturday and Sunday are below freezing, and but the low on Monday is back up above. That's I will have to go back and look. I mean, it does help that the vehicle is right on, not exactly, but I mean within yards, few hundred yards from the water. So the water does help a little bit in terms of moderating the temperature. So it might be Monday morning, it might be colder inland, probably will be. So I could see it being 39 out, 40 degrees out on the coast, and being, below, 35 or below inland maybe. So maybe that's the thing. But so yeah, somebody's noting that there's a crude flight around the moon without a moon lander. This is just the this is how Congress decided to pay for things. Is they wanted to be able to fly astronauts on missions, but they didn't want to spend the money to buy everything all at once. The only time they ever were willing to do that was, these are obviously completely different generations of people, but the Congress of the 1960s is the only Congress that ever was willing to pay the price, and it's a very high price, but they were the only ones that are ever willing to pay the price to build the full system, everything needed to land on the moon. And so since then, nobody's been willing to pay for everything and build everything at the same time. So they chose to build the spacecraft and the rocket, and we have 15 years and going back even farther of just there. You can argue about what the price tag is, but I would say if you assume, and maybe people would say like there's a premium is not the right word, but let's say it costs a certain amount of money. There's overhead, maybe is a better way of putting it. There's overhead to building a government system. And so if you spend 80 cents on the dollar for that, or again, like this system was built with a flat budget versus Apollo, which was built with the more traditional, you have a big, you front load the investment to get all of the infrastructure built up, get into a production tempo, et cetera, et cetera. These systems were built on flat funding, and so even if it's a lot of money, you can still shortchange things, which is what they've done for a long time. So and so that's what you end up with, is you don't even end up with the spacecraft and the rocket necessarily. They're ready to fly crew for the first time, but it's a lot later than a lot of people thought they should have been. So it's at least 5 years past the original forecast. So the original forecast for SLS and Orion was uncrewed demo. And again, this is because of money. So the original forecast for it was they could only afford to do an uncrewed demo as soon as maybe end of 2017. But then because of money constraints, they wouldn't be able to fly the crewed demo until 2021. So they were already looking at a 4-year gap between those two missions anyway, because they couldn't afford to build to build the infrastructure in a expeditiously. But then both of those have slid. So Artemis 1 ended up flying end of 2022, and now Artemis 2 is flying early 26. And so the point being, if you can't even get the two pieces that you paid, that you actually invested in done, then, this is why, and they aren't willing to spend the money to pay for a fully government funded and government operated lunar lander. So the message really is that, they're only willing to spend, there's a ceiling to the amount of money that government's willing to spend on space. And so they'll do whatever they can, they'll do whatever they can do with the amount of money that they're funding, but they're just not going to, and we just saw another example of that. Obviously there's politics involved, but there was they floated this trial balloon of, is anybody interested in building a government operated lunar lander and doing it in a hurry? And so, and that died very quickly. And so, yes, the current administration, so the White House and Jared Isaacman, I think, just, had no interest in that. And, but neither did Congress. We didn't hear anything from Congress about that. And so, again, to me, it tells you it's sort of, there's a level of commitment, but, as I've said a few times now, Congress is completely dependent on two self-made billionaires, and not, they're completely dependent on Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos to accomplish this goal that they're talking about, which is to beat the Chinese back, beat the calendar, beat China, but at least beat one of them. And that's still to be determined. It is, I think right now, if you had to bet, the best odds are on the calendar again. But that's why we're flying people to the moon without a lander, is because that's all they paid for. So that's, so, I mean, question about my background. So yeah, I've been interested in the space program since I was a little kid. We were just talking about this in a member live stream the other day. First launch was, I saw the Apollo Soyuz, joint launches. So the first launch that I ever remember was the Soyuz launch part of the Apollo Soyuz test program. And then I also saw the Apollo launch later that day. I'm a child of the shuttle, more or less, because that was all kind of what happened after that. And so I've been interested in it since then. Went into aerospace engineering to the point I got a degree. That was when the Cold War ended, no jobs. And so there was a lot more work in software development. And so I went off that way for 20 years. Still interested, but there was no money in that job market when I graduated from school. And so, but then I got back into it, and I wrote stories for NASA spaceflight for a long time, for kind of the last decade. But what's happened is the reason that I'm here on YouTube now is because the information that we get from NASA is much more visual. So we have a lot of this. Well, assuming I can bring it up. So we have this visual, but we don't have a lot of words in context about what it is. But I did for a little while. I was able to get some level of context from talking to people. And then I have some background again with shuttle systems. I don't have enough of a background to operate them, but just in terms of being an observer of how they operated. There's, again, enough to be, probably enough to just be, dangerous in terms of what I say, but not even dangerous in terms of doing anything. But anyway, just been interested in this for a long time, and I followed that interest a little bit here, but it's just gotten progressively more difficult to do that. And so, whereas I used to write 4,000 word stories for NSF, there was a period of time where I was writing, dozens of stories for NSF every year. It just got progressively more and more difficult to do that and to write detailed stories about this. But I still have all of that reference material and all of that knowledge. I can still leverage that to some extent. But it doesn't tell you, again, all of the things that I'm constantly asking questions about. It doesn't tell you about the current status or the forecast for the future. And those are, you still have to ask for that stuff. So, let's see. So Anthony, I guess the question for Anthony though is the lows are going to be in the mid 20s on Monday, or I know it's going to be bad. Like Sunday morning, what we were hearing was, Saturday night into Sunday morning was supposed to be really cold. And then, Sunday night into Monday morning was supposed to be decently cold too. Maybe not quite as bad, but, that would be when they would be getting ready to tank the vehicle if they're going to do the test on Monday. So that's a, and so, again, how much different is that from the forecast for Saturday night? That's the question there. Let's see. So I think Dave's talking about this old shuttle. STS-109 was the second to last Hubble servicing mission. So that flew back in, it was Columbia's second to last mission. It flew in early 2002. And they were working very similar time of the year climatologically. And they were working low temps at that time. But I think that I guess the question there though is has the methodology changed in terms of either the measurements they're taking, the how long they're taking them. I don't know that they were using a 24-hour average. I mean, is this a running average? Is it running for 24 hours? These are the types of things, again, I was not doing this was that almost 25 years ago, because that would have been really interesting to ask. What was his name? Ed Prasilak, or the launch weather officer back then. But was not doing this back then. So I do hope it would be interesting. Again, I don't know where I'm going to be when we get to countdown status briefings or when we get to a briefing with a launch weather officer, but I'm sure whoever that is going to get questions from others for sure. Because this will likely continue to be a question going into February 8th, February 9th, February 10th. So, I would say, stay tuned. Hopefully we will get a little bit better, a clearer understanding of how the methodology they're using now, the protocols they're using now. It's possible that they're very similar to shuttle, but it's also this vehicle is a little different. And again, you don't have the space. It's an inline vehicle. Spacecraft's on top. You have the fixed service structures in a different location, or well, it's not a fixed service structure, but play along with me. So the umbilical tower for the mobile launcher is on the north side of this vehicle. The shuttle fixed service structures were on the west side, so they would have been over. The shuttle fixed service structures were over here, and the orbiter would have been. We'd have been looking at the orbiter right here on the side mounted orbiter back then. So that doesn't necessarily have any issue or differences in terms of methodology and protocol, but it's a different dynamic in terms of prevailing winds and weather rules in terms of winds. So I think I have a, it's a really rough, it's a low res graphic of the wind rules preliminary wind rules they were talking about for Artemis 2. Is this it? Yeah. So no, I have to close the other one first. So it's you can down here is where the wind speeds are, but you can sort of see the and again these are you can see based on the launch date they were quoting back then. It's not that old, but we've had the launch date was then bumped again. So this would have been I want to say 2024 would have been sort of vintage 2024. Because they reset the date at the end of 2024 to this no later than April, so to speak. But anyway, they have the winds they have a little bit lower wind constraints from the south than they would from the north. The vehicle has at least a little bit of blockage from the umbilical tower. So, but I mean, there are some other interesting things in here because, again, this is you can see in addition to revising the liftoff winds and the wind constraints, they reduce this is one of those life limited items in terms of how long. I don't know if this is cumulative or not, but I assume it would be. They would want to limit the amount of days that the vehicle's out at the pad in the elements because of wind exposure to 120 days. I again, kind of like the solid rocket booster 12-month stack life. If they needed to go do some analysis to ensure that they're good, they could do that. But you still have some limits in terms of you just can't stay out there. You wouldn't necessarily stay out there forever, and there are some other things that would force them if they stayed out there for March and they weren't able to go in March, then you might see there might be some discussion about coming back after the March windows. Again, that's obviously to be discussed at a later date if it becomes an issue, but yeah. So So there's the question about when do we think Artemis 3 will fly? I think it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult to even guess because we just don't have any information. There are people that have, I would say, enough information to make that guess, but it is not being clearly communicated. And, again, you get into when you have these large organizations, it's bad for morale to be, I guess I would say, fully realistic or fully transparent. You're trying to motivate them to do things, to do them faster, better, cheaper. And so there's a value for management to give them a goal and see if they can beat it. And so that's one of the things I think that makes it harder for us to get clear information. But I think there has to be some sort of a happy medium in there where we get something that's we can, whether we get enough information to tell whether a schedule is more aspirational than optimistic, for instance. And I don't think we have enough information to tell that right now. There was that schedule that was leaked in, I think it was either late October or early November for Starship. We don't have anything like that for Blue Origin other than we had the one little comment from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, and he was in just a podcast, and he sort of, he just very casually said, Blue Origin said they could do it. I think they said like mid 28 or summer 28. I think it was something like that, but just very, just a casual reference. We don't have any, we don't know how they get there. At least with Starship, we know how they get there, with the big demos, propellant transfer demo, uncrewed demo. And so it's, I have no idea. Well, that's not a way to do it. But there's not enough information to tell whether 2020, by 2028 is just a motivating goal or how realistic it is. Those would be, that would be kind of an extreme. And so we just don't know how realistic it is, because we don't have any information to really judge. And so, we'll see. I think, unfortunately, in the absence of that, we're just going to have to see. And it is kind of like what Mr. Isaacman said during the rollout, which is, if we see them launching, then we can see what kind of payloads they're flying and what missions they're flying. But right now they're not launching very much. And so that's not, we're obviously going to need to see, an increase in tempo, but also an increase in on orbit tempo, orbital missions tempo. And so that's, I know what questions I would ask. But I've been asking those questions for 2 years, and we still haven't gotten an answer for most of them. So, it's just really, it's hard to say. I think, if you were to look at historically, based on the history of the mission getting delayed over and over and over, and they keep delaying the mission from one aspirational, highly optimistic launch date to another. Just based on that, you would say it's, the likelihood, it's more likely that this date is one of those. But even for these missions that have been delayed a lot, like Artemis 1 and Artemis 2, eventually they're ready to fly. They will get there at some point. So, but that's the thing. We just don't know. We just don't have enough information really to make even an educated guess. It's at this point we're sort of a, wild blank guess, with the information that's in public. And so that's, and even, even SLS and Orion for Artemis 3, we have a little bit better of an idea. I would say there's still I think there's still either the hope or the expectation that the remaining hardware that needs to be built for those will be done by either the end of this year or close to that. So maybe the very beginning of next year. But can't fly the mission until those are done either. And then obviously the spacesuits, we're still waiting for some of those critical milestones for that, like critical design review. So, vacuum testing with, testing that suit in a vacuum with a person inside of it. That will be one of those tests that they need to do for the Axiom EMU spacesuit. So, and we'll just again, as I was saying for Artemis 3, at least we, that leaked schedule put a propellant transfer demo somewhere in the June timeframe. So, let's see when this, version 3 of Starship starts to fly, and then let's see what kind of tempo they can establish there. And then when they get to that propellant transfer demonstration mission, which will require at least 2 launches. So you launch you launch one prototype into orbit, and then the second one goes into orbit, rendezvous, and docks to it. They do the propellant transfer, and then they both return. And are reused. But that's we'll have to see where that ends up on the calendar. Hopefully this year. So the yeah. So that's it. That is interesting. I'm seeing that news. I didn't know that they were going to it's interesting in a couple of different ways in terms of well, I guess I can try and there's some questions exactly about what they mean about what they're doing, what Blue Origin's doing with New Shepard, because I see people saying that they're going to again, it's like, well, what exactly are they doing? And then the question is, what does it mean? But so for instance, they need the resources or they need the talent in that program. They want to leverage that the talent they have within the company and prioritize their lunar development. Does that mean, is that part of the acceleration program? Not necessarily the concept of operations, but the just implementation of that. So I'll have to go see about that. But pardon me, then obviously one of the things I'd be wondering is are they willing to talk about what they're going to be doing? What does that mean from a company standpoint in terms of resources, in terms of because we don't know what their plan is for this HLS acceleration, that makes it difficult to have sort of to figure out exactly what is going on, and what they're doing, because they don't have very much time to meet this goal either. And the interesting thing about the end of by 2028 goal is, in theory, the Chinese lunar program would not be ready to land by that time, and they are not necessarily racing us. Congress wants us to race them, but there is essentially always a race against the calendar. So there isn't that much time for Blue Origin either, and so that it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what they're if they say very much about what's the rationale behind it. What are their reasons for doing this? Is it internal company resources and marshaling the resources on the highest priority now? Is this a consequence of the HLS acceleration, or is it more broad than that? So I just think that's interesting. Yeah. And so, the HLS program did get a funding increase, relatively speaking. I think it was, again, their annual budget for this year was at about $2 billion. And I think that's up from the ballpark of about $1.5 billion prior to that. So, but that's, again, Musk and Bezos are the ones who are investing in the R&D for their products, and the products have more value to them than just purely winning this race. They are, there's a market in theory, and they would obviously also like to, with the government as an anchor customer, if there's a market for sending people to the moon and to Mars, then they would be positioned, and they would be better positioned than other competitors. So, but yeah, well, Congress is already has a laundry list of things that they're paying for, and I think they're happy that there are these two people who are willing to invest the amount of money that they're investing in this, because it's more than Congress could invest or wants to invest. And so As long as those guys are willing to do that, they're not going to get in their way that much. Certainly not for funding and developing Starship and Blue Moon and New Glenn and the cislunar transporter, the technologies that they're developing. But it's going to be interesting it's going to be interesting because I think the race with China isn't necessarily a commercial goal. It doesn't I don't know that it is I don't know that it makes the commercial products more competitive or increases their market share necessarily. It's a purely a national goal. And so, there's always going to be that interesting tug of war between business priorities and national priorities. And, especially when you're talking about products that are commercial products, the government, I don't know how much leverage the government really has over these systems because they're not the primary investor or the majority investor in the system. So it is kind of interesting. So, but I think, I think we'll be talking about this for the rest of this presidential term. So along with some other things, but I think for right now, I think what will happen is obviously we're hoping that Artemis 2 is a safe mission, a successful mission. If it's a clean mission and they can turn around and fly the next SLS and Orion sooner than later, then it would be an interesting conversation, or it could be an interesting conversation. It may or may not be, but in a way, I think this is in front of NASA being willing to have that conversation in public to any degree. So this mission needs to fly before we're going to get anything about what NASA might be thinking about doing after this mission. So there's some value, not just in achieving all the test objectives for this mission and succeeding. And, this demonstrates that you have a fully crew capable, crew rated rocket and spacecraft. But that's always going to be a question about this system, is, how often is it going to fly? And so that's one of those questions. That's one of those questions that's outstanding there. It's an outstanding question that we already know for sure, which is, are you going to wait for the lunar lander for Artemis 3? Do you have to wait for the lunar lander for Artemis 3? If you could fly a mission in 2027, like maybe the end of 2027 or early 2028, would you consider doing that, or are you just waiting for the lunar lander? And when I asked that question a couple weeks ago, and the answer I got was basically, we're not ready to talk about that yet. So, at least not in public, because they are talking about it internally. They're just not ready. They're just not willing to talk about that yet in public, which is too bad, because I don't know that it's going to I don't know how much this is really going to change the readiness to fly another mission. It could be crucial, but again, the other thing I've been saying is I don't know whether NASA is prepared for the possibility that this mission is not just successful, but also clean. Because in theory, you could fly another mission within 18 months. But they may not be prepared to do that, so that's obviously going to be a question if that happens. There's obviously other possibilities. Are they prepared to deal with, an issue like they had on the heat shield? It might not be a heat shield issue, but it could be something else like that requires months of investigation. And then, okay, now you aren't ready to fly. Now you aren't ready to fly next year, or maybe not even until deep in 2028. But usually they're prepared for options that are realistic. And so right now I can't tell whether they are prepared to, I can't tell whether they are prepared for the option, for the possibility that this mission is clean and successful. So that's going to be, again, one of those, that's another one of those, what happens after Artemis 2 questions that are out there. So, but I think, again, unless we have, so I guess maybe I'll wrap up with this, which is what I'm planning on doing is, I know NSF, NASA Spaceflight's planning on covering the wet dress rehearsal, but as I was saying, it's a long day, and there are different phases of the day that are important, and so what I'm planning on doing is I'm planning on covering that early, the sort of mid-morning to lunchtime and maybe a little bit after lunchtime period when they start tanking the vehicle, where they saw the leaks on Artemis 1, and just following along with whatever NASA is going to give us in terms of detailed updates or situational awareness. We may get this feed, we may get another feed of the vehicle, but we're not going to get live commentary. And so the question is whether the situational awareness that we get on now Monday, how close that gets to real-time situational awareness, or is it sort of a couple of updates an hour? Do they what I would be interested in is, these, almost all of these bullet points here are just bullet points taken, they are milestones taken straight out of the press kit. If I would be interested in an update saying, the MMT tanking meeting started, the MMTs go for tanking, they've, and when they begin the chill downs, that's kind of the unofficial start of tanking. But each one of these items is an important milestone in the countdown and in the tanking procedure. And I would be interested in getting, some confirmation that each one of these was completed, because there's the predicted timeline, and then there's the actual, when do things actually happen? And then obviously, is it successful or not too? So again, we'll see whether we get this level of detail or not on Monday. But I'm still planning I'll either do a live stream here, or I'll be with the NSF live stream. Probably going to be more like both. I'm kind of thinking of this as something on Monday, of doing some kind of like pregame show, so to speak. Follow the tanking along. Hopefully they get into stable replenish. They'll send the closeout crew out there to do the Orion closeout. That's the other big, the three big things are fueling the vehicle, no leaks, or that whatever issues they have, they're surmountable issues, so that they fuel the vehicle. They close out Orion in the White Room. So that's the closeout crew. They're able to successfully do that. And then that they're able to do the terminal countdown runs. They're planning on doing 2 of them in that window beginning at 9 p.m. On Monday night. And so if they're able to successfully do all of those and get them done within the time constraints that they have, those would be the types of things that would give them the confidence to then go ahead and make a launch attempt as early as Super Bowl Sunday. And so I think I'm pretty sure NSF will be live by the time we get into by the time we're looking at the I don't think we're going to see the closeout crew, but we should get updates on how their work's going along. I would think that the NSF live stream will be up and running by the time we get into the closeout crew at the pad, going through the Orion stuff. And so I'm tentatively thinking of covering the tanking, the tanking timeline from, looking at here from like 9 in the morning Eastern to maybe 1 in the afternoon. And just, looking for updates, taking questions, and, we can just sort of hang out and, and we'll see. I'm not sure. I'm right now planning to be at Kennedy Space Center for that. And we'll just have to see whether, we'll have to see if that's a good place to be or not. Whether I can be speaking even this loudly and not bothering people in the news center or not, or whether I need to be in a quiet place. And of course, the problem with it being 35 degrees outside is that'll make it more difficult to do anything outside. So, but we will see. But that's kind of my plan. So, right, tentatively travel tomorrow night. Maybe there again, we'll see where things stand on Sunday, but otherwise I'll definitely, I'm planning on doing something on Monday, to cover the tanking, the beginning of tanking. This period is the first sort of critical hurdle that they need to get over, during the wet dress rehearsal, on Monday, is to get the vehicle loaded, get through those big hurdles, get the core stage and the ICPS loaded. And then that goes then into the closeout crew stuff. That's the second part. And then the third part are the terminal countdown runs at the end, which won't begin until probably somewhere around 9 PM if they're reasonably close to schedule. So, but that's kind of what I'm thinking, and we'll just have to see. We'll have to see how things go. If NSF is a full-fledged broadcast company, they're a well-oiled media organization, and so they have much better resources than I do. And so if I can, if I can do that on their live stream, I'll do that on their live stream. And so I'm still have to figure out, where I can do that on Monday morning, but I will try and keep you guys posted about, where I am and what my plans are for Monday morning. And we'll just have to see how it goes. Hopefully it is not too cold in Florida, to get around, Sunday and Monday. But right now, again, I can say sort of last round for, last call for any questions. But otherwise I'll sign off shortly hereafter. And so, yeah, Anthony works in the program. And so he's always been helpful in these live streams to sort of fill in some blanks. So we really appreciate him being around just to he's closer to things than we can be. So that's good. And so, yeah, right. And so, yeah, cause like, that's the thing with, again, and so he's talking, again, I'm, let me scroll back and see if there's anything in here, but there's, for Artemis 3, you have these systems that have been building up some level of momentum. So Orion, SLS, and then Exploration Ground Systems is launch, landing, and recovery. So launches, you're launching Orion and SLS, and then when Orion returns to Earth, you're recovering the crew and the spacecraft. And so those programs have been around for a while, and they've built up to this point. But then you've got the lunar surface spacesuits and the lunar lander that are still in development. And so they're on different timelines. But you'll need all of those pieces in order to do a week-long stay on the moon for Artemis 3. And so the question is, if you have just, you definitely have a pipeline of Starship being more hardware rich, I would say. We've already seen them launch almost a dozen prototypes in 3 years. But if you have downstream Orion and SLS units that you can, that are coming up, coming along, then it isn't, you at least have the possibility, or maybe have more flexibility in terms of, maybe we could do something. We could fly another mission to get more experience and more reps for Orion and SLS before the lunar landing, while still satisfying the requirement that happened before the end of 2028. That might be a tight squeeze, but they'll need another vehicle to do that. And that's why the question of do they have to wait for the lunar lander isn't just purely the lunar lander. It's also, you need to have another vehicle and crew waiting when the lunar lander's ready, assuming it's going to be out there towards the end of 2028. If not, then you have to use the third one. And so, these are the kinds of things that we would like to have a little more, a little better of an idea, at least, about what they're thinking for this. But again, it sort of comes back to Artemis 2. It's like, what happened? We need, we're ready. They're almost ready to fly the mission. And so let's see this. We'll get to see the moon. We'll see astronauts at the moon for the first time in a long time. See how the mission goes. How what do the post-flight results look like? But assuming that the mission is successful and it's relatively clean, then we can have that conversation about when the next flight would be. But that's, I think there are, as Anthony's saying, there are some conversations about what's possible. But I think because we haven't heard them, that's why I ask the rhetorical question: is NASA ready for the possibility that Artemis 2 is not just a successful mission and safe, but it's a clean mission? And it's like, hey, we've got this asset. We've got the next builds coming up. They've had a long-term goal of flying every year. The only way that you're going to get to that goal is to start reducing the amount of time between missions. And so, again, if you had a clean, successful mission, then you have to start trading those priorities against each other. Of, do you want to, which one's more important? I mean, if I politically, I would imagine the lunar landing is more important than flying more frequently. So, but like I said, let's see what happens and see what they're thinking. Not necessarily in that order, but I think that's probably what's going to happen. So, but I think, yeah, as long as we will have plenty of time to talk about this, even possibly during the mission. And so but I think what I'll do is, in fact, I'm getting to the point here where it's going to be time. Teddy's going to be ready for his dinner here. Well, he's already ready, but we don't usually feed him until 5:30 here local. So, but it's getting close. And let's see. So Trevor, this is probably a good place to sort of put a pin in things. So Trevor's asking if the wet dress rehearsal is the tanking day for the wet dress rehearsal is Monday, but they did talk about that if it slips again, where they're looking at a day-for-day slip. I believe that's what it says in the release that came out this morning. So they don't really have a whole lot of time left. And so there's we will see how that plays out here. The countdown for the wet dress rehearsal now would start on Saturday night. And so that's tomorrow night. And so we will see, hopefully we will get some sort of a heads up. Hey, the countdown started tomorrow night. last night we didn't get that, but I think very quickly thereafter we started hearing about the delay, but I'm hoping we get something tomorrow night saying either, one of those two things, either we started the countdown, we're pressing ahead to Monday, or whatever else, whatever other option that happens to be. So, but that's what we heard today. And the thing is if they have to if they slip the wet dress to Tuesday, that probably takes, the implication was that took February 8th would take February 8th off the table. And then you're down to the nights of the 9th and the 10th. I'm trying to be specific about how I word that, because you can see the launch windows themselves are the 9th and the 11th, but it's those, you still have to be ready to go the nights of the 8th, 9th, and 10th. Those are now the days, or the remaining nights that they have for launch opportunities. Or if you want, you could say, if you use GMT or UTC very early on the mornings of the 9th, 10th, and 11th, but it's the same thing. It's just separated by time zones. So, so that, again, I have heard, again, I think that the question is going to be, well, and we'll see. Cause again, maybe they'll have some good luck. They get to the first launch attempt, the weather's okay, the weather's good enough, the vehicle's good enough, and they launch. That's not out of the question. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's also not out of the question. But I think the issue is going to be, if you don't get off the ground by the second attempt, what do you have to do to pull a third attempt in for those 3 nights So anyway, I don't think we have to worry about that right now. Right now we have to see what happens with the wet dress rehearsal, the results, and then see if they are ready to pick a launch date, probably a couple of days after that. And so, and there will be time to talk about that on Monday, hopefully when the vehicle's tanking. I probably should say, if they don't tank on Monday, there will probably still be time to come back and do something. It's just, the schedule will get rearranged a little bit, just depending on whether they stick to this schedule or whether they reschedule again. We'll just have to see what happens. But I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for tonight. But like I said, I'm planning on, I'll just have to see how things go if I get to Florida on Sunday, kind of what the state of things is. But if not, I'm hoping to see you on Monday morning to talk about, or maybe you could see or hear me. I'm not sure how the bandwidth's going to work out, but I am hoping to figure out a way to do a live stream from Kennedy Space Center with the shoestring budget. And so I'll definitely be trying to do that on Monday morning, one way or another, trying to talk about the tanking, and we can do questions, and we can talk about these same broad range of topics then. But I think for now, I'm going to go ahead and call it a live stream, and we'll come back and hopefully see you again, hopefully on Monday. And again, if I can wedge something else in, I'll let you guys know on the weekend. But again, thanks for stopping in and seeing what's going on. And again, for the channel members, thanks for doing that. Hopefully going to continue to be able to do more for channel members through the mission. But I also really appreciate your questions and your time, and hope you like my channel. There are other videos. If you like my channel, take a look around at some of the videos that are here. I've done a lot of videos on Artemis 2, on the history of it, and on countdown procedures. I do think at some point I do want to get into, and I'll just do this, but I do want to at some point talk about the part of the countdown that we're not going to get to until launch day, which is, and we'll get to that, but which is basically the last 30 seconds of the count. And so this stuff beginning the autonomous launch sequence, starting the booster HPUs, releasing the water, the H buoys go on, the engines start, and then you do the you arm the boosters and then you fire them, and the mission starts. But I hope we have time to go through some of that, and we can go through these terminal countdown runs too. But I think for now, I'm gonna call it call it a stream, and I'll hopefully see several of you again on the next one. But thanks again for your time, and I will see you next time.